Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
So Ron Fortier and I are sort of switching roles here. He's asked me to be the host, and he's going to be the guest. And just a little forewarning, I wasn't anticipating this. So we're just going to have, I think, a usual chat that we might as friends. We'll pretend we're sitting at
Moby Dick was really great that night.
Yes.
There was a nice little feasting and everything too. Yeah.
So I'm gonna just ask Ron about. Yeah, and oddly enough, Ron was the subject of one of my written profiles just a few weeks ago. So I'm probably going to rehash a little bit of that and maybe draw a little bit more of that out. But anyway, welcome to your show.
That's a good one. Yeah. Oh, by the way, it's the In Focus podcast.
Thank you. I didn't have any cue cards. Okay, so I guess that one of the things I want to follow up with, as I'm writing these profiles, I have an obligation to write 500 words. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm never under that. I'm usually 300 or 400 words over.
Yeah.
And even that said, I sometimes feel like, I'm still not getting everything down. But it's a newspaper. It's not a biography, So
right. I'm surprised they don't cap you at 750. I mean, that used to be the standard, but.
You know what? The paper doesn't have a whole lot to print. Without restaurant reviews and theater reviews and all that. This is, I think they're going to just let me run wild. So, and they obviously put a lot more photographs in than they used to as well, at least in terms of the artwork. So, in any case, your return to the narrative. Now, I kind of got a pretty good idea about how that came about and why it came about. And my introduction to your work years ago at Lewis's old Colo Gallery, I remember describing some of your work as,
people thought you hated me. But what was it, a mad meteorologist?
Yeah, something. Yeah, there was
a Martian meteorologist or something like that. Yeah.
Of a madman, right?
Yeah.
And I know that you've been connected, and I don't know how you felt about it at the time. And I don't mean by me, but I think by others. Cy Twombly, which seems to me an obvious connection, even if it was one that you were not totally immersed in. And you seem to have had this, and I know this more from our conversations than from the work itself, that you're retreating from a narrative because the narrative somehow revealed emotion.
Yeah.
So when I started, and I did go to that little art show that was in Kilburn Mills, like a year and a half ago now.
Yeah.
And saw that little Arctic painting, which I guess if I had seen that somewhere else in that environment, I would not even guessed it was your work. And it was a pleasant surprise, which is not to denigrate the other
work. I understand.
It was so different than what I had seen.
But I know it wasn't meant to be a compliment. It was you. People are always put you on a spot, especially with friends. Oh, do you like his work? And you're like, okay, we're friends. Let's look at that. But you said something that was interesting. Actually, two things, and one of them was that I thought was kind of astounding. And I know it was sincere, and I accepted it as a compliment. You said, you know, sometimes I find myself looking at your work, and your work represents answers to questions I wasn't even aware I should ask. I was like, wow, that's either such bullshit.
It's a bit of both.
That was incredibly but profound. And I was like really touched by it.
Well, you know what? It's interesting because that has become, when I am writing my profiles, it's almost become a standard question for everyone now. Because at the end, I kind of have very direct questions about their lives and about their mentors and their influences and, you know, so on and so forth. In almost every person at the end, I say, hey, provide me answers to questions I haven't asked yet, or that I should have asked. And some people just choose to ignore it, and some people just take that as like, huh, I'm just going to go hog wild with that answer.
Yeah.
So,
But you had actually said that to me.
That was when I said that to you, that was the first time it
okay.
It occurred to me, yeah.
Okay.
And so, but now it's become such a touchstone, you know, for people to kind of bounce off that I continue.
Yeah. It's funny too, because one of the pipe dreams was to have a video component, and video is a little more complicated than doing audio, because you have audio and video. And I've been wanting to do this series, and now the technology is there, but the time, there's only so much time. And it was a single question to the artist. So what are you trying to say? And they have 3 minutes. That's it. It's uncut. Boom, there it is. And I always was very curious to see what they would have to say about it. The Cy Twombly part is kind of weird, because I was at the University of Miami, and oddly enough, because I've got a bizarre memory to begin with, I remember exactly where I was. And we were having like an impromptu crit. And another classman burst in because one of my classmates was their instructor, and saw my work and said, "Oh, is that Cy Twombly's?" And my first thought was it must be an undergraduate, because I knew everybody, you know, in both years of graduate. And it was like, oh crap, I don't even want to look at it or know them, because I don't want them in my head. And fast forward to the last few years, Dave Richardson pretty much tried to, and it was successful, rubbing my nose in Cy Twombly. He said, you have to look. So I started looking slowly, and I started reading up about him. And what was astounding to me is, how is it cosmically possible? And I'm not saying I'm as good as Cy Twombly, but some of my work and some of his work, especially pieces you've never seen, it's like, how the hell is this possible? And even some of his working philosophy, like he'll say, I won't do anything for months, not because I've got a block or anything like that. It's just because I've got nothing to say. Mm-hmm. And then, boom, it comes out in torrents. And I was kind of astounded by that as well. So I just ignored it, and I just concentrated on how the hell do you put in a horizontal line in an abstract painting without it being a landscape. Mm-hmm. And my work went from what I called iconic, not because it was wonderful, but it's not. So what is it a painting of? Oh, it's not a painting of anything. It's itself. It's an icon. It's just like a manhole cover, an Oreo cookie. Those are icons. And then when I was in graduate school, I was swayed by my thesis instructor to, while I was down there, incredible group of people, older than me. They had left there. They had made their mark. Leon Rosenblatt, who was a premier illustrator of his day. You've probably seen some of his work on a National Lampoon cover. I mean, if you've got the 6th album with Merlin Hole in the Globe, that was Leon. Peter Zorn, who was a Renaissance man. He was an industrial designer and a graphic designer, and he developed the 1/6 lunar gravity lander simulator for NASA. He worked for GM. He had 3 advertising agencies in Pittsburgh. He was an astounding individual. And then there was Steve Fuller who was the art director for Channel 5, and his logo is not going to go on 50 years. That Channel 5 logo is that old and it's still that fresh. So I had these guys, influencing me, and they were very into history and such. And I started exploring, because of Peter, especially the West and the genocide of the Native Americans, and the horrors of living in an ungodly, unlawful environment. And I did these graphite drawings, and a lot of they influenced me in a lot of ways. But I've always had this problem since I was a kid of going to see, believe it or not, a Jerry Lewis movie. And what's that?
Who doesn't?
but going to a movie is supposed to be a comedy.
Yeah.
And 3/4 of the way through, just as it starts, the real denouement, okay, where it just starts going just to hell in a handbasket. Everything starts devolving. The physical pain that I suffered watching a human being lower themselves that badly, the shame, I couldn't take it. I've read The Horse's Mouth, Joyce Carey's Horse's Mouth, 6 times, but I've never gotten through the last chapter, because Gully Jimson just is totally destructing. He's just coming apart, and I don't know what it is about my psyche that just doesn't let me accept that. So between the thesis instructor shifting me over back in abstract, because that's what got me into the University of Miami, and I think now I'm remembering that's probably the lesson he wanted me to learn, because my work was on slides at a friend, on Lorenzo Andrade, who was a Cuban refugee, and yes, they've been separating babies from mothers for a long time, was at St. Joseph's Orphanage in Fall River. He went to SMU. He was a year ahead of me. We, back in those days, we all carried the sleeves, the 35mm slides of our friends. Mine just happened to be out on this desk. The department chair walks in, Andrew Morgan. He looks at it and says, "Who the hell's this guy?" And he says, "Oh, that's my friend Ron." I wouldn't even bother you with a Cuban accent. "That's my friend Ron." And which is amazing that Larry maintained his Cuban accent in all those years, being totally distanced from any Cuban possible, right? At St. Joe's. But anyway, and he says, "Well, you pick up the phone and tell him to get his ass down here. We want to interview him." So that's the work that got me in. And as you wrote, free and clear, full ride, whole 9 yards. Then we had the gas explosions of 76. And it was 76, right? Yeah.
I think it was January 77, I think.
Was it 77? Oh, it was. Yeah, it was. Okay. Because a couple of things happened while I was down there, beside the bicentennial, my grandfather's death and such. And then my dad nearly getting killed. He left Clem Daly's office, because that was one of his accounts. And he said, talk about don't let the door hit you on the ass, as he was going to put his foot on the sidewalk, the building blew up and threw him across the street. But anyway, so that started me going. I never really liked living in Miami because of the bugs, the heat, the humidity, the crime, And so I was getting a little nostalgic, and with the influences of Steve and Peter, Steve Fuller and Peter Zorn, and watching what Leon Rosenblatt was doing, I said, okay, I'm going to create this thing for my thesis theme of fire and ice, the Antarctic whaling disaster. And back then, all you had for research sources or resources was the library. And so as I started to do that, Tim Downs, that was the name of the instructor, said, no, 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 you got to go this way. So what I did is a series of assemblages, a dozen boxes, and 2 giant-sized paintings, and a series of tempera paintings. And they were abstracted, but not completely abstracted. You could see layers of fabric and like ropes and so on and so forth. But the one thing that I did that was objective was because we were instructed to do a self-portrait or something representational, because instead of having a MFA thesis catalog, we had a box with each one of us had our own catalog in, of our own design. So when I came up north, I was bound to determine that I was going to re-explore that, especially since I was in the motherland. Life and recessions and everything got in the way. And when I started painting again on a challenge from Luis Villanueva from Colo Colo, who I remember speaking with you, and you told me, wow, this is like the hottest gallery in town. And this guy, he's Chilean, he's brilliant, he's a little, well, he's an artist, but he has, I mean.
I stand by that all.
Yeah, I'm gonna get him. He keeps insisting that nobody wants to listen to him. I said, oh, everybody wants to listen to you. And you can be yourself, there's no parameters. That's got to be fun. But anyway, I got in there. I bring your stuff down. I went in there, and I'll never forget. He went through my portfolio. Now, my portfolio was from the the work that I did at the University of Miami.
How many years earlier?
40 years earlier. And that's all I had. And so he takes it out, and he said, may I? And I said, yeah, go ahead. And he starts laying the stuff out on the floor, and he's crawling on his hands and knees. And he's making piles and then reshifting the piles, and he's taking all this time. Then he looks at me in the very Luis, way, and looks at me and goes, yes. Yes, why? Like, yes, I'm giving you a show. And then he goes into his business mode. Here's the contract, blah, blah, blah. Can you do it this time? Fine. I got a phone call a couple of weeks later, and he goes, no. Like, what? No, I'm not giving you a show. I'm like, yeah, hey, for this first shot of the box, hottest gallery in town, I almost made it, right? He says, no, I want to talk to you. So I went down there. And he says, can you do 30 pieces of brand new work in, I think he gave me 8 weeks to do it in. And I said, yeah. He says, you know why I'm doing this? I said, no. He says, because I wouldn't be doing you any favors. He says, you're not young anymore, and you're not getting younger. And I love your work. I'd love to buy half of what I saw in your portfolio, and I'd love to show it, but I wouldn't be doing you any favors. Can you still work? And then he gave me this compliment. You were so far ahead of everybody, is what he told me, that now the world has caught up to you. So I have difficulties accepting compliments. And I'm like, okay, so that's when I did that styrofoam series. And because of that, as loony, cantankerous, whatever, you either love him or you hate him equally. Because of that, he said his respect for me would never die. Mm-hmm. And so I started, could I do this again? I painted in my head. I've done assemblages, I did drawings and such, but not going back into doing, back as a professional, so to speak. And I found, I think it was at one of my openings at Colo Colo on Center Street, and you were standing there, and somebody walks up to us, and I think it was a woman, and they asked me why I did what I did. And when you go to answer in your typical, let me pull out one of my cards, my trump cards, bad analogy. And before I could get the words out of my mouth, the other thought just slid right through and said, do you remember the character Jack from Close Encounters of a Third Kind?
The guy with the mashed potatoes?
Yes, with the mashed potatoes. I said, that I can't explain it any better than that. I don't have any idea what's driving me, but it's got to come out. So that evolved to a point where people keep asking you, and because the artist statement, as crappy as most of them are, is nothing more than an exercise. So is sharpening a pencil. Okay, there's something about that. You're turning the old-fashioned pencil sharpener. There's something to it, right? So it evolved to the point where, okay, I'm painting cold-bloodedly, and my objective is, the greatest objective, I think, as an abstractionist, is to paint nothing.
Mhm.
It's an impossibility. You know you're going to lose.
Right.
Like I said, you put down that horizontal line.
Yeah. Sig Haynes and I had a conversation one time, and he talked about how important Jackson Pollock was to him, which
Jackson
seemed
Pollock and Sig Haynes.
absurd to me, right?
Wow.
But he sort of made it make sense. First of all, I talked about, that he's a landscape painter and paints nature. And he said, well, if you look at Pollock, he's painting nature too, right? It's just like, whether it's the splash, raindrops hitting the puddle.
Right.
If it's the stars, the macroscopic, microscopic idea work, which I get. But really, he said that he started doing these landscapes because he wasn't always a landscape painter, because he wanted to figure out a way to lay down color and shapes, but he couldn't be Pollock. He didn't want to be Pollock, but he admired how he put things together.
Well, his pre-drip paintings were very.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that he feels, he's obviously, I'm talking about Sig now, owes much to Matisse and to Cezanne, but he also owes a lot to Pollock. And I was kind of shocked when he told me that. But in retrospect, it makes sense to me. It's, he always has said about painting that, and I've kind of called his bluff on this a little bit, but that even though he's out painting the landscape, it's how does he put it? It's not painting in service to the landscape. It's landscape in service to painting. If that makes, it's like almost the subject doesn't matter. It's
right.
about,
wagging the dog or wagging the tail of the dog. Yeah.
Right. And that makes me think, and I was, before you got into your story about Twombly, I was thinking that much like the argument or discussion about the difference of the endless battle between utilitarianism and contemplation, which is what I generally think of as, painting, so how do I phrase this? There is work that's meant to make you think. There's work that's meant to be used. I mean, like a mug.
Yeah.
Michael Petraglia made
instrumental right.
And it's not to say that those things don't meet somewhere in the middle, and often do.
Mm-hmm.
Visual arts can also be utilitarian. Obviously, advertising is, and billboards are, and signs are, and
right.
fashion is. But which is, I went off to do a little tangent there, but really what I was getting to is, I think that this ongoing discussion of narrative versus formalism is a nonsense argument. I think that Sig discovering how important Pollock was to him as a formalist, the formalism itself is telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
Making that decision, if your painting of your paintings of Tulsa are telling a historical narrative, but you can also argue the point that blue line next to that, and I'm not talking about your painting in particular at this point, a blue line next to a yellow line is also telling the story.
And yes, because Paul and I, we went to my opening in Chicago. And it was in uptown Chicago. And it was right next door to Koreatown. And one of the partners in the gallery was Korean. And he, a lot of the people who came to the exhibit, solo exhibit, were, I mean, there was quite a diverse group, but there was a block of Asian women who were all over my work, young women, 20s, 30s probably. And I gave them I'm painting in cold blood, I'm painting nothing. And Paula even noticed that, not just with them, but in this particular case, the pushback was phenomenal because they told me how I felt while I was painting each, and we went almost like 5 or 6 of my pieces of work. And I stood there slack-jawed, like, how is it possible that they talked about my spirituality, they talked about everything. And
if you don't tell the story's gonna be told for you.
Exactly.
I'm reminded of, being a freshman at Swain in a 2D class. And when we were I think the whole first semester was just black and white before they let us have colors.
Yeah.
I remember having a paper punch, and we would punch out 100 little black dots, and then we'd arrange them,
Yeah.
in little 4-inch squares. And we had to do, it seems like endless we were doing this for a semester. And you would put 3 dots over here and 1 up here, and then somebody would say, oh, but this one's lonely. They were bringing a story to it. I mean, they were just circles in the square, but somehow we as human beings want a story.
Well, one of my favorite quotes from Van Gogh, the one that really sort of kicked me in the soul, and nearly brought me to tears, was when he was reminiscing about looking at a starry night. And he said, the starry night is very similar to a railroad map. And each one of those stars is a stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can get to your destination in France, but you will never get to touch one of those stars. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh my God, the guy was, he was what he was. And, separating the myth from the man. I read the latest book. It came out, 5-6 years ago. Van Gogh, I mean, like 600-800 pages. But the other thing too is that I was really lying to myself. I'm going to admit that I was lying to myself. I think we do, because don't forget, before you can lie to someone, you must first lie to yourself and believe it. And then that day again with Luis, because he had the booth across, on the other side of us at that holiday art fair. And the first day I introduced him to Paula, he fell deeply in love with her. I mean, the two of them are like 2 peas in the same pot. I mean, it's unbelievable, the reaction. So she, as I told you for the interview, she was already ticked off at me for, what do you have, like a garage sale? You should always be putting your best work forward. I'm saying, well, come on, it's look, this is New Bedford. It's the holidays, people looking for bargains. I don't care, okay? So she's with Luis, and they're humming, and Luis is like a cat. He notices everything. And that one painting, the whaling painting, was the one that people were coming over to, and all the abstract work that was just like, which I think supported my theory about what people want around that time of year in the city. And don't forget, most of our openings, who shows up to our openings? We show up to our openings, right?
Yes, we're a support group.
Right, exactly. There's like 15 of us or whatever. It's always the same 15 people. And so that one particular painting, Lewis was watching what was going on. And then this gentleman walks in he sees him entering the main entrance, and his eyes hit the painting, and he made a beeline straight for the painting, looked at it. May I? Yes. Picked it up, put it down. He said, how much? And he's whispering to me, how much? He says, we've got to be quick. I'm going to buy it. This is my wife's birthday, Christmas present, and I don't want to see because she's like somewhere right behind me. It's like, okay. So we negotiated the price. did the square thing, the whole 9 yards. And then that's when it started. It's like they wanted to know, why didn't I continue painting? And the other thing too is what people brought, the viewer brought, Gombrich referred to it as the viewer's share. What they brought to it. People saw spirits and they saw destruction and in this simple little 2016 painting or 2016 painting. And that's when they started psychoanalyzing me. And Paula, dug down on my soul and just pulled it out and said, "You've been hiding your emotions for a long time. You're full of stories. You're a storyteller."
Human beings in general are. It's just, human beings are. It's our nature to do that.
Right. And I grew up in a storytelling family. Well, my mom was a storyteller because her dad was a storyteller, and that's how, in that culture, the old country, you preserve legacy is by the great stories. Some of them are epic, some of them are, whatever. And then I hadn't heard about Tulsa before, and then when I did, something inside of me, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a great grandfather. What am I going to tell my black daughter? Well, she's accosted by some asshole. What can I do about my great grandson, okay, in California, who's going to be 3 this year? How can I protect them? How can I, And then the weird thing is that as I was developing these paintings, I always put them in front of Paula, not for her validation, but just input first, instant thing. And I value it because I've changed because of her. She's like, the biplane. I understand the biplane. It's part of the historic aspect. You have to have one in every single thing. And I said, well, I've been battling with that. She said, because if you take out the biplane, she said, it's still valid. So I had trouble extracting that out. And she said, so what? But I told her, I said, but the biplane represents audacity. It's audacity. And then I don't think I even related that to you because I think it was your last paragraph when you said that this new work was beautifully audacious or audaciously beautiful, beautifully audacious, I think it was. And
they're ballsy paintings. I couldn't use that word in the paper.
Oh yeah. But although I tell you, I don't know if you've been reading feeds from CNN and MSN. Oh, I mean, they're letting it rip.
Understandably.
I mean, the headlines, the headlines, and they'll do the asterisk and exclamation point thing. But when you get into the body copy, man, it's like, he's a fucking asshole. It's like, okay. So anyway, I just found that kind of interesting that you said that. And then the other thing too is I explained to Paul, I was like, I had difficulty being an enraged white guy about who the hell was I? And I wanted the input of black people.
Let me follow up a similar thought. So
sure.
We've discussed a number of times now that I deal with adolescent boys in the lockup facility. The vast majority of them are young black men. Not all, but most. And I've been doing this going on my 4th year now. And I worked with the DYS many years ago before I was married, Department of Youth Services. And of course, the N word gets dropped all the time. Not in anger, but in kinship and also. But I made a point of you can't use this word in my room.
Yeah.
And a few other words, but that was the primary one. And then it became sort of a joke after a while. I would hear a kid and I'd say, whoa. Do you like Winnie the Pooh? And the kid would turn around and said, of course I like Winnie the Pooh. Everybody loves Winnie the Pooh. So why are you asking me that? He says, I thought you just said something about Tigger. And then he said, oh yeah, I see what you're saying, Tigger. So it became a joke, right?
Yeah.
At one point, and this has to do with being a white man in response to some of these things. It's not quite what you're talking about, but similar. I basically just said, you know what? I don't care. Do what you want. Who am I, an old white man, to tell young black men how to talk?
Exactly.
So that's.
Yeah. But the thing was too is like, okay, because of my mom, you wrote the article. She's still amazing at 94. I spoke with her this morning. She was so, she was a feminista before I even knew what the hell that was. She was in homeopathic stuff before anybody knew what the hell that was. Political, oh my God. Political, oh my God. And the other thing too is that she was a linguist. She was multilingual. She is multilingual. And this thing about color, she just didn't deal with that. And she had these odd experiences too, living in New York. And they say, oh, you have an accent. And all of her life, she's like, oh, I have this accent. I have this accent. And I said, Mom, you have an accent because you can speak more than one language. Okay. And she said, oh, but you know what? And she said, people are so ignorant. And I said, yeah. She said, well, people say, well, where are you from? She said, I was born in Yonkers. Oh, but you have an accent. Yes, it's because my parents took me when I was very young to Portugal, and I didn't come back until after the war. Portugal, but you're not black. Now, this is the mentality of the mid-50s, mid-60s. Well, but you're not black. And she says, no, I'm Portuguese. There are black Portuguese. I'm not. I'm white Portuguese. Mm-hmm. And she said that ignorance is really what drove her insane. Right. Grew up, with her always saying, okay, if there's the only black kid in the classroom, you go and you say, hi, my name is blah, blah. If he wants to be friends, great, but don't ignore him. And that's the way she pushed me all of my life. And I thought, okay, I'm pretty cool with all that. And then I married a black woman. Mm-hmm. I didn't know shit from Shinola. Mm-hmm. Because like she said, I cannot experience her experiences.
Sure.
But talk about being woke, to use that term now. When I go with Maddie into a store, and if she's ahead of me because she's excited she's going to go buy something, and I'm locking up the car, and I come in and I can see them surrounding her like a shark, like a pool of sharks, and it's like, hey Maddie, what's going on? It's like, oh, she's with you? Oh, that's okay. What do you mean it's okay? It's just bizarre, and that. I didn't know how to wrap my head around it or put my hands around it. It took me a long time to produce the first painting. And then by the time I think I got to the fourth one, then it was dominoes after that.
Right. And those paintings taken out of context, seeing one at a time, even seeing them all together without identifying, without a title, so to speak.
Right.
I mean, one of the pictures was of a woman looking out the window. Right?
Yeah.
And I sent the pictures to my editor prior to the text because they want to start laying the page out.
Right.
And she said, oh, I love this painting. That's how I feel a lot of mornings, kind of thing. But she's just thinking somehow this is the glorious sunrise or something. And then when she got the text, she's like, oh, I take back what I said. I didn't realize what the painting was about.
Right. Yeah, you didn't see that biplane making a beeline towards your house, dropping turpentine bombs. Yeah. Yeah.
And she was, I think what she was really thinking, she was just looking at it as a metaphorical attack, not a historical attack.
Right.
Yeah. So she was like, well, I wish I'd known what the painting was about before which does not say she still didn't like it, but it changed the meaning for her. No,
because that's perfectly valid because we've all had those, what? And then like you feel the flush of embarrassment, around your ears and your face. And it's like, oh, but then again, I had to have that first intuitive flash for a reason,
By the way, I want to mention something that you may or may not be aware of, but this has to do with a pop culture interpretation of the Tulsa bombings. So there's an HBO show that may be in its second season now, Watchmen, which is on an old comic book. And it was turned into a movie many years ago, and it was not a very good movie. But the people who are doing the TV series, it doesn't even have anything to do with the comic anymore. They just went off. Right. But in the original comic, there's like this tragedy that gets things happening, that people become vigilantes, and it has to do with the Cold War. In the television version, the incident that makes everything happen is the bombing of Tulsa.
Right. And that, unfortunately, was just one of many incidents in what they call the Red Summer, which I think we're kind of experiencing that now. If you look at, it's 100 years have passed, and things have this weird cyclical way of, occurring. But all the self-training that I had doing the abstract work, the techniques and so on and so forth, I always used to say, and I still do, that when I would be painting, I go reach for a tube of paint, and the voice in the head would say, no, not that one, not that much, this much. And okay, so the same approach when I finally got into the groove of it. And the composition, Paul's like, if you doing any sketches? I said, I can't, it's weird. I just see it and I put it down. So when I did the first Arctic one, and a lot of people like it, but to me, it's kind of illustrative to, and the second one I've been battling with, which I guess it's been kicking my ego, which I needed it. And I'll continue doing that. But it's pent up. I don't know. It's pent up. I'm not, it's probably even the same thing as with Close Encounters. It's the same exact kind of experience. Nothing's really changed. It's just that the imagery is different.
Yeah, there's something I was talking about not doing a preliminary drawing. I'm reminded of Don Beal, and though he does a lot of landscapes, he's really ever in the landscape. He's been painting for so long that it's like muscle memory.
It's imprinted, yeah.
He's just goes in, and you think, wow, I wonder where this was. He's like, oh, that place doesn't really exist.
It's a composite, right? He's definitely on the radar. I mean, the list of people I want to have on the show is like enormous, but he definitely is one of those. I mean, we have like this cadre of talent around here that's phenomenal, and it's not a pecking order. I mean, I did this change. It was needed for my own head, my own survival. It took me a year to get this far, and I'm excited about some of the upcoming projects. I found actually it was my cousin Wendy, who was my Uncle Armin, that I never referred to as Uncle Armin. It was always Cowabunga, because I thought he was Cowabunga. That's how he laughed. And I call him that to the day he died. And she was going through his stuff, and she found this calendar. They still do it. I mean, it was a cardboard thing with a tear off months, and my dad's photograph plastered on it. They've been doing that since the invention of photography. But it showed my dad in the hayfield on our farm in Quebec. And in Quebec, the province, Quebec, the town, and the farms there are what they call range farms. Range is ladder, so they're very narrow. They're like slices of bread, like thin slices. And by old French law, every property has to touch a body of water, so they have access. So there's nobody, taking over water rights. So they're 1,000 feet wide, and this particular farm is 2.5 miles long. And he's standing there, and he's got, he's his goober bib jeans on, and he's got the pitchfork. It's sort of like Canadian Gothic, and he's looking to the west. And the last month that was left was December of 49. He was 19 years old, 18 in that picture. And I always looked at, ever since my cousin gave it to me, I'm looking at it, it's just something about it. And then putting things together. Somebody came up from Massachusetts to the farm. Now, he had been placed there. My grandfather was forced by the cops in 1935, 6, 7, to relocate his son to the closest relative because the neighbors were complaining about the beatings that my grandfather gave my father. And that's still a mystery, still trying to fathom why that even happened. So he grew up in Canada, and that's where he was, and that's where he was happy. And in that moment, they must have caught him in a moment of reverie, just standing there in the field. And he's a worker. I mean, you gave him, you gave him an axe, you gave him a shovel, and he was content.
Mhm.
Work was his art. And so anyway, somebody supposedly came up and said, "Hey, Roland, you better get your ass down to the States and register for the draft." And my dad, his typical attitude, like, "What for?" "Because of the Korean War." "What the hell's that?" Because they were that cut off. And so the premise is that, he did come over the border. I think he may have been arrested because we found some pictures of him in military uniform. But yeah, he never spoke of it. My father was a functional illiterate. He was a severe dyslexic, considered a dummy growing up in the 30s and 40s. Yet every menial job he ever had, including the Berkshire Hathaway, he rose up to management. Every job he ever had until he opened up his own business. And it's sort of funny to have an iconic photograph of somebody of this moment where everything started to spin in a whole other direction. So that's now my new narrative is this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I think that spinning in new directions is probably a good thing. As I mentioned in that article, and I said to you about those paintings already, they're astounding. They're just really good paintings, and I don't toss superlatives like that.
Oh, you don't, because I've been trying to get one from you for a long time. Yeah, like I said, even in that first review that you did, there were people like, "Oh my God, I thought he was your buddy." I was like, no, I mean, he pretty much he described what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what do you think? Are we done?
I don't know. It's up to you. You got a few more minutes. You got to wrap up.
Well, let's let me ask you this kind of question that maybe will feed us out. What after the Tulsa series is done?
For now, The Voice, The Guide, whatever it is, and I know it sounds crazy, but I think it's my father-in-law that I never met, Dr. Batchelor, who was an incredible artist. He's, when you and Elizabeth come over, you can see some of the work that he did. He was also a cardiologist. He's a phenomenal. I just feel his presence. It's very, very difficult to describe. But then again, some people tell me I'm sensitive, so I'll take them for their word.
So, and you're gonna return to the Arctic series?
The Arctic series, I'm on the second one, like I said, which is kicking my butt, and it's because I was approaching it academically. I didn't put myself in, so now I'm in a panic. So now that's good. So I'm just about ready to get out of that one. But going back to Tulsa, the voice told me 10, stop at 10. I don't know why, just stop at 10. So I'm gonna mess around with the Arctic, and then I got my dad's series. And then if I go back to the Red Summer, it's gonna be the election riot. That little town, that's when I know I can never remember it, in Florida, where a black man was hung for having the audacity to vote.
What year was that? Roughly?
1920, somewhere between 18 and 21. I'll send you the thing when I find it. A lot of these incidences are bubbling up to the surface. Truth can never be buried completely, but it's that audacity that is what's driving me crazy.
I'm going to have you if you have Spotify or Google, check out this band.
Mhm.
They're called Stu and the Negro Problem.
Okay.
And Stu is black man. I don't know the rest of the band, who, how what their makeup is ethnically.
Yeah.
He does a terrific song called Florida that still is echoing, that kind of sentiment. Like this
Right.
is, so yeah, I'll go down there with some barbecue, but I'm not going. It's like, but your town, but you really suck, Florida. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that still exists there and lots of other places. But anyway, I will kind of say this as we're wrapping things up, that I think that this shift in your focus is good for you, good for us as viewers looking at the art. But I think maybe better for you, because I think this is you burying that stuff. Paula and Lewis were right. I didn't really have the I'll use the word again, the audacity to say that to you myself. But yeah, this opening up, especially now you're gonna do the series about your father. I mean, that's you're touching raw nerves, So
Yeah.
and I think that's probably a good thing.
Yes.
Don't spend money on a shrink when you can do it with paint.
Well, the other thing too is like, what the hell do you call this? I was calling it social expressionism. I mean, yeah, you got to put some sort of a label on the damn thing. So,
yeah.
If you can come up with a good label, let me know.
I'll work on that. Well, it's been a pleasure interviewing you, Ron. So
thank you. Thanks for turning the tables. I wouldn't have anybody else do it. That's for sure.
I appreciate it.
All right.
It's been a pleasure.
So I'll take us out then. All right. Well, this has been a very unique experience. I've been on the other side of the microphone, so to speak, being interviewed by Don Wilkinson. And this is Ron Fortier, the usual host of the Artist Index In Focus podcast. But today's stand-in host was Don Wilkinson. And until the next time, stay safe, stay sane, be kind to each other, and persevere regardless. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.